Hi, I'm Lauren Epstein, the host of Your Hired Radio. I'm glad you're with us today. I was in San Francisco a few weeks back, and I interviewed a bunch of people at the HR Tech World Conference. I just want to let you know that it was HR Tech World. A couple times I said HR Tech Conference, I misspoke. So we hope you enjoy the show. It's about all things HR technology. A lot of them are fascinating shows about the future of work and the current economy. Thanks, and enjoy the show. Welcome back to another episode of You're Hired. I'm your host, Lauren Epstein. You're listening to 96.7 FM, Arlington, Virginia. We are on the road today. We're in San Francisco at Fort Mason, and I'm looking out this beautiful, huge window overlooking the bay and Alcatraz Island. It's absolutely delightful. I think the weather's in the 60s and just amazing, beautiful sun. And we're at the HR Tech World. That's happening this week, and I've got some amazing folks. We're going to talk about things that I think you'll be interested in. So with me today, I've got Johnny Campbell, who's the CEO of Social Talent, which is a great piece of technology that recruiters use, and also Bill Boorman, who's the founder of True, and he is a thought leader in hiring people. So we're going to talk about kind of fundamental stuff around how people do things, about how they think. So Johnny, we were talking earlier today, and we were talking about, what are we going to talk about? And you said, well, what motivates someone to do something? And so what is it that you feel are some of the things that our listeners can kind of understand about that for themselves?
So I'm really passionate about the things that don't change fast, about who we are. So a lot of in HR, we're at HR Tech Conference, so there's a bit of an obsession around what's the newest technology, what's going to be around next year, what do we need to watch out for. And the technology does change fast, like reasonably fast. Maybe not in HR as much as other sectors, but it changes fast. What doesn't change is people. Like, we change slowly over millennia. What motivates us, what drives us, what makes us do something. And I remember when social media was kind of first becoming a thing in HR maybe 10 years ago. People were like, how do we work with it? How does it work? And the fundamentals of how a human interacts with a story, an image, whatever that might be, and what emotion means and how emotion drives their behavior. That's like something that's always been around. And,
right.
I remember the best social media talk I ever heard was a guy in Ireland who's called a Shanor. The Shanor is Gaelic for it's kind of an old storyteller. Before TVs and radio, the Shanor would come to the house of somebody in the community, and all the kids in the area would come around at bedtime, and the Shanor would tell a tale. And this Shanor, this experienced storyteller with grey hair and everything else, he was the best person I ever met around social media because he could tell a story. And fundamentally, the companies that got social media right were the ones that could tell a story. And it's those kind of things where you realize what underpins everything we're trying to do with technology. And when you pull back to, okay, well, one-on-one, what influences people? Great story, emotions, images are stronger than words. We're going to relate more to an image or a feeling or a smell or whatever it might be, and less to the tech. The tech will change, that's cool, but as long as you're kind of sticking with the stuff that drives people, doesn't matter what the tech is, you'll figure it out. And it's remembering that I think is that's what drives me. It's trying to figure out, where people meet tech and focusing on the people side.
When we talk about good stories, we're talking about stories that really highlight the archetypes and fundamentally communicate something that I, as the listener, can either identify with or tapped into.
Well, to give you an example, right? What can you think of the best book you've ever read?
Actually, no. I mean, I've got a lot
best
of books. Best
movie you've ever seen?
Oh, well, Star Wars. I mean, so that's
so
right out of Campbell's The Hero's Journey.
How old were you when you first saw Star Wars? 10. So I guarantee you to this day, what you're not going to remember when I say Star Wars, you're not going to remember the dialogue. You're not going to remember every single word. Now, I'm sure you can quote endless passages. What you're going to remember is probably the feeling you had the first time you saw Star Wars, and the feeling you have every time you see it. And it's the repetition of that. And our long-term memory is driven by feelings. It's driven by images, which drive emotions, and that's how we store long-term memories. We don't store long-term memories with words. We forget the words really quickly in our favorite book, the little dialogue in our movies. We remember how we feel. We laughed, we cried, we were excited, we celebrated. And that's fundamental to how our brains work, is that feeling. And it's driven by this kind of, mistake we make in recruiting and marketing in general, where we believe that logical arguments work. Logical arguments sell. Like, this is the best company for you because you'll earn more, it's close to your home, blah, blah, blah. As opposed to, I feel excited about working for this company. I feel like they're like me. They make me feel safe. They make me feel happy. Feelings are the most important indicator whether a company is good for you or bad for you, whether they'll take a job. Not the basic stuff.
For those who are listening, if we were going to highlight a story that exemplifies what you're talking about, a corporate brand, what would it be?
So Apple. You buy Apple, or perhaps work for Apple, not because of their technology, not because of it's superior to somebody else, the software is better, or their share price is better, or their net earnings. You align yourself with what Apple stands for, not because of what they stand for, because you don't really care. You see in them yourself. You see values, you see beliefs, you see things that you hold dear.
So if I see them as innovation, right, that's what they're known for. If I see myself as innovative and I identify with that.
I break rules. I don't use Windows machines because that's what everybody does. I try and be the person who pushes back.
So if in some way I live my life, I can identify with those values.
You'll seek out organizations that best represent you. It's not, they're accidentally being you and they got to appeal to that, but it's you're seeing in them. It isn't something you want to be, it's what you are, what you perceive yourself to be, and that's how you'll align yourself with it.
So Bill, if I am looking for a job and there's, some number of companies that I can work for, how do I put this in play? Because, they may not have like an Apple brand. It may be just the Bob's, whatever.
Yeah, which it is for most people, right? So right. Most people are looking for ordinary jobs in ordinary companies.
Exactly.
And I'm not saying that with any disrespect, but it's very easy when you're in San Francisco and in this tech bubble to think the people in Louisiana or just outside Washington.
Right. I mean, looking out this window, we have a certain amount of...
Yeah, you have a certain amount of what works. So I think what we really need to do is work on stories. When we're talking about stories, what do people want to do? They want to connect with people like them and find out what's this place like. Increasingly, they're more interested in jobs. So I think what's going to be your currency moving forward? What can we tell your listeners as advice? And I think not even thinking about companies.
Or persons.
The currency for everyone, for people, is their network, right? If you don't network, it's network or not work, in my opinion. So how do you network? Whenever I talk about networking or not working, I actually think we overcomplicate all this stuff.
Yeah.
Right. So I want
to get to the networking component, but I want to stay on the story component because
this is what I want to tell about the story bit, right? So when we talk, I think what's important is not the story. Right. What's important is the teller, and what your relationship is with that teller, how you feel about them, how credible they think that you are, and all the rest of it. So, and that's becoming more and more important. And for me, you learn these skills. Actually, we're born with these. We learn these skills in places like bars. Right? We learn to tell stories, we learn to relate to people. Johnny has an excellent training platform called Social Talent, in which one of the most popular video that everyone comes back and says that I get the most comments about of everything that I do, that they contact me all the time and say, can I connect with you? I've read this stuff where you're talking about networking being like, network like you're in a bar, right? In that everyone has skills or a profession. They're all different. Most of the time, I don't need those skills or profession. Therefore, most of the time, I don't want to hear about your skill. If you're a plumber, I don't want to talk to you every time I come in the bar about plumbing.
Right.
But if I have a pipe burst, you're my go-to person. You're the person that I know or that I remember. And I remember how to do it because you've told me how to do it. You've told me a story. Somewhere. You've told me a story and I relate to that story and I trust you as the teller. So I think this... art of storytelling is let's not complicate it. Let's go back to wherever we're doing that, whether it's digital or in person, our interviews. Let's kind of reinvent the art of conversation.
Right.
Let's talk to people. Digitally, if you're in chat, in Messenger, even emails going back and forth, let's learn to communicate and
So what would that be?
use
so we're
stories.
talking about, you mentioned some great mechanisms.
Yeah.
What are some of the fundamentals to storytelling? I'd love to hear from both of you because this is clearly something.
Well, there's basics of stories. One is all stories have a beginning, a middle, and an end. They have it in the beginning, and they all lived happily ever after. And what goes on in between? Usually they have a dragon, so there's usually an enemy, and there's usually a knight who rode off with stuff, right? So telling stories is kind of having that little bit of structure to it. The story is the same story. It's told in different ways according to who the audience is.
Right.
So if I were talking to a group of students who are 18, I might tell them a story about an employer or about work or anything else. If I was talking to a group of HR directors at a senior level, I may tell them exactly the same story, but the way in which I tell that story and the elements that I tell are quite different. So I might say, this was my experience when I was working with the BBC, and this is the thing that happened. Now, that in essence is the same story.
Did you work at BBC?
I re-changed all of their branding and all of the way that they hire. So I did that. It was like a 2-year project. And Oracle and some other organisations. So, and the point of it was the way in which we tell the story is really dependent on the audience, the people we're talking to. So I think it's also developing that ability to say, parts of this story are going to be interesting and parts of this story are not going to be interesting. And what I've got to figure out is the pieces that are interesting. But the story is always the same.
Yeah. So one of the things about story that I like is I learned story in a 3-part thing where you talk about the background, then the tension, which is the problem, and then the resolution. And all good stories kind of like go through that iteration where, a long time ago in a land far, far away is the background. And then the problem is like, the
this is the journey. This is the things that we did on the way.
Yeah.
And then here's the end. This is how we all lived happily ever after.
And then every bit of story has that component. What do you guys think of that?
So I call this, my biggest lesson around storytelling is what I call the Breaking Bad formula. And they weren't the first to do it. But I remember watching Breaking Bad for the first time. And you go through an episode and you go, this was okay. It was reasonably interesting. 42 minutes in, something happens. You're like, oh my God. For 2 minutes, you're like, and then it ends. And you're like, I want to know more. What the heck happens? Next episode opens, you don't find anything more about that for 25 minutes. And then I see the resolution, then I get another 10 minutes or something, then I get, it happens again.
That was like the Lone Ranger here in movies, that nothing happened, but at the end, he almost dies, and then you're like, ah.
But the thing is, to simplify it to say there's a start, middle, and end, yeah, sure. But the really great storytelling, and Bill, you're right about the whole fact that it's the storyteller, because, a lot of Shakespeare's stories are quite simple, but the way he told them is amazing. But you create that tension regularly by leaving a gap in the listener's knowledge. And those gaps are really important in a story. A complete story from start to end that just tells you in a sequence, this is what the background, this is what we did, and this was the end. It's a boring story. This is the background, and you kind of go, did it work out? And then you move to something else and you go, I want to find out. You go, well, let's tell you a different story arc. And pause that for a second. And then they build up something else and you're like, what happened with that? And you're like, well, let's park that one again. Let's come back to the first story and let's continue it.
So is this, are you talking about as a way for companies to be communicating to folks and folks communicating to companies, or just in general?
Yeah. Do not,
because that's a little,
So the best story of a company and the best story of a person is where we haven't actually got to the destination. Don't end by wrapping it all up in a bow. The beauty is the potential. So the storyline that says, there could be many ways this go. I really am interested to figure it out. That's an awesome story. Here's the guy who started off his career at this route, and then he took a different route altogether, and he's now doing this, and then he's doing this. What will happen next? That's me, the candidate. I'm the what will happen next. Or this is the organization where we used to be this. Now we're trying to change to be this. We don't know where we're going to get there, but we want you to come help us. That's an appealing thing. It's like, well, okay, this is a journey I want to be part of.
Give me an example of a story that you like one for your personal that you feel like kind of captures that sense.
So, the best podcast I listen to, the TED Talk guy, basically called Guy, he's got a new startup talk about a startup podcast. And he introduces every podcast with the founder he's interviewing. And basically the founder, the first words of every podcast is a quote where the founder will go, and there you are, with no money in the bank, the sheriff knocks on the door, I didn't know how it would work out. And it basically goes to Guy saying, at this show today, we've got blah, 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 talking about how we founded blah, 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 and what happened in that moment. And then you go back to a story, and you don't get back to that quote until 20 minutes into the podcast. And then you find out the answer to that, and then you move on to something else. And it's a beautiful device that's made the podcast, which is the story of startups, fantastic, because they're not just doing the linear, let me start on day one and work you through. They open with this pregnant story that is not given birth to until way later in the actual show. But you need to open with that unfulfilled beginning, middle, I don't know quite what happens next, and do it really well. And the organizations that become exciting tell a story that isn't yet complete, regardless of whether it's simple or boring or pedestrian, is trying to never try and close all the loops and finish the story. I think both as a candidate, but both as an organization, because that makes you interesting.
Right. So to create that tension, I mean, that's what you're talking about.
I think that point that Johnny's talking about, why the Breaking Bad bit really resonates with me is that I actually love now what I'd call, moving on from Breaking Bad, is the Better Call Saul, where in Better Call Saul they're introducing the story.
You guys have such modern references.
But they're bringing you the stories of people we already know. We already know the outcome of what happens with Gus Fring. We've seen him be killed. And it's kind of like when you're saying about Star Wars.
Well,
it was the prequel.
American Beauty. It starts off with the guys like,
the new stuff is saying,
the
new stuff is saying, you know the story at the end. Now we're going to tell you more detailed stuff about
how so let's bring it home, right?
We're going to answer your
questions. I'm a business owner, and I want to communicate like my story to people.
Well, I think it's this ongoing story, right? So there's certain things...
Let's forget about the ongoing. Let's talk about the first step.
Well, basically, if you're going to communicate your story, let's talk about the story of a job, right? So let's take it on a job level. I've got a job, and I've got certain ways that I can present that job. So I can present that job to you as here's a list of duties and some hours and a bit of money.
Boring,
right? I can do that. That's nice and boring. Or I can say, this is the story of this job. This is how this job came about. This is the in the beginning piece. This is the background. This is why we're hiring now. This is what this person's got off to do. This is the middle bit. Like, these are the things that are important to us, and this is the end of where we're going to end up.
So even write the job description as a story.
Well, you want it to be a story, but actually, I would want that story to be told by the people who do that job, not by the HR guy.
Right.
So to me, as a business owner, if you're thinking about that proposition, or if you're the CEO of a massive organization, whatever you are, people care about why you do it, not how you do it. And to me, this is at the heart of the story. The good story has to be told well, for sure, but I want to hear the story of why you as a business owner decided to do this. You're hiring, you're looking at attracting me. Why did you build this? Because there's other companies like you, there's other people doing what you're doing.
Right.
Why are you doing it?
Right.
That's the more interesting story. Right. And again, not the scripted, actor, and yes,
so maybe me as a job seeker, instead of having a resume, I should have a narrative.
Yeah, but I want to have access to the story. So it's
you
just
won't have access?
I want to have access to the story. So say you own a restaurant, right? And you're the restaurant owner. You have no idea as the restaurant owner what it's like for me to be the busboy. Because you haven't been a busboy for many years. You might have been in the past, but all you can do is tell me a nostalgic story of 20 years ago, 30 years ago, I started as a busboy, and this is great. And that's the inspirational piece. What do I want to do is I want to hear the story of the other busboys. Right. Who actually say to me, this is what being a busboy is all about.
Yeah, so the story has to be told by the person who's actually in it.
So who's the teller? So I think for all the time we're thinking, the chief has to tell the story, and I think the chief has a place. But I'm more interested. So if I'm going to be the busboy, I'm going to be a waiter, I'm going to do the washing up, I'm going to be a chef. I want to talk to my peers, and I want to know the story of that. How did they end up there? What are they like there? What's cool about it? What's not cool about it? Where does it go? Creating those conversations over content, right? Those are the things I want to see, so that I really buy into. And so I'd say to anyone, business owners who are hiring, people looking for jobs. People looking for jobs, you got to figure out how am I going to tell my story and make it relevant to the situation.
Yeah, that's what I'm saying.
So how am I going to tell these are the things that I've done. This is
talk about the resume, and I think
beyond the resume, it's got to be the story.
That's kind of a boring,
but it's right. So, but it's also got to be beyond the story, which is this is why I connect with this. This is why this is interesting to me. This is why this is important to me. So one of the stories that really stands out to me from recruiting that I think recruiters have to remember is there's a guy called Chris Hoyt who did a lot of hiring for PepsiCo, and he said he did hundreds of hires in a year for a contact centre type place. And he was interviewing a girl one day, got to the end, said, yeah, well done, you've got the job, congratulations. When he went outside an hour later, the girl's waiting with her dad, and the dad's in tears, and he's cuddling him and saying, thank you so much for giving her the job. And then you get the backstory behind, this is why I want to come and work for you. And the backstory was, if she didn't get this job, we were going to lose our house, right? So in every job interaction, I think the more that you hire and the more that you interview, the more it becomes a mechanical process. You ask me for some information, I give you some information, it goes back and forth. Actually, behind all of that, there's a human story of this is why I'm here, this is why I want this is why this is right for me. So I think the more you learn to tell your own story in that way, necessarily in a way that says, right, this is, if I interviewed someone and said, right, I really want to come work for you, I'm going to work really hard, I'm going to be so grateful for the opportunity because it's going to let me keep my house. I'm going to say, you can start on Monday. We don't need to know any more stuff. So
that's interesting because some people, like where I live in DC, they wouldn't be that revealing. They wouldn't be that vulnerable because they think, oh, maybe I'm going to look like a loser.
No, but I think it's how you deliver. I mean, it's how
Johnny's
you deliver
shaking
that.
his head. There's something there. In telling a story, you're defining yourself and you're saying, this is who I'm with and this is who I'm not with.
But you've got to tell the story in relevance to the situation, right? So if I tell you the story as in, I can't pay my mortgage and it's really tough for me and all the rest of it, you're going to go, you're kind of a loser, we probably don't want you in our organisation. But if I'm saying, look, this is where I'm at and this is what I need that chance and opportunity. I remember an interview out of the thousands that I've done over the years that really sticks out in my mind. I remember interviewing a girl for 35 minutes to do a recruiter's role, so essentially a sales role. And she'd worked in a canteen making sandwiches, right? So I interviewed her and I'm comparing in my mind with some other sales people that I'd seen and some other people who I was thinking at this time were going to be better. And the very last thing she said to me, just before I always ask a question when I interview as the last question, which is, okay, we've been through everything, you know about us, before you leave, is there anything else you think I need to know about you that would help your application? That's always my last question. And she turned around to me and said, the person you interview next and the person you interviewed before is probably better qualified than me, but I promise you no one will work harder if you give me this opportunity. And that was kind of on the spot. I just went, right, we'll forget about the 20 minutes of me going, there's no real, me going, there's something in that. There's a human spark in me that says, I want to give you that chance. And she never let me down. She ended up actually being a director of the company after like 15 years, and it was true. And I think it's that communication of the human to say, this is the connection point, this is where I'm at. Now, you don't want to make it sound desperate and a sad sob story, but you also want to go, look, and I think this is the bit for most people these days. The difference between having jobs and not having jobs and having money and not having money makes a significant difference to their life. So if you can frame it in that context of this is what I need, this is where I want to go, this is where I'm looking at going, these are the things that I'm going to buy into. And I think as organisations, this is what we want to be, the story we want to be telling. The stories of the opportunities we've created for people in their life, not in their work. These are people who've gone off and done other things, right? They're the stories I want to hear.
Johnny wants to talk.
So I think what I'm hearing from you and what I always believe in as well, Bill, is that the story should make them feel something, not think something. When you have built an entire, call it employer branding strategy, a recruiting strategy, attraction strategy around thinking, I think you're doomed to failure. I think you need to make it about feeling, but it needn't be somebody revealing a sadness or a happiness. It could be just they were proud. People express many different emotions, and any of those emotions work in a story. And you shouldn't force it like, okay, we need a sad story, we need a sob story or background. It could just be how proud you felt. It was, it could be a simple story that says, by doing this job, and it's a fine job, nothing special, but it's really fine, I can get home in the evening and I can basically put bread on the table, and my parents weren't able to do that. I love the stability working for X gives me. It's still a story. The story is actually about when you go home. It's not about in the office. It's about the family connection or whatever it might be. That's the emotion people are left with. They're left with this emotion of, the emotion that they can relate to. And it's knowing that...
Just to let the listeners know, you're listening to You're Hired on 96.7 FM, Arlington, Virginia. We're going to take a quick break and we'll be right back. You're listening to You're Hired on 96.7 FM, Arlington, Virginia. I'm your host, Lauren Epstein. Thanks for listening to our show. If you're interested in getting on the show, you can give me a call at 240-876-0276. Or follow us on Facebook at You're Hired. And you can join my meetup where we teach interview skills at interviewskillstogetthejob at meetup.com. Again, I'm your host, Lauren Epstein. You're listening to You're Hired on 96.7 FM, Arlington, Virginia. Thanks. Welcome back to You're Hired with my guests, Bill Boorman and Johnny Campbell from England.
From Ireland? How dare you call me from England? Shame on you.
Ireland.
Messing with the heritage. So I think when you're telling that story and you have an emotion that you want to resonate with, or resonate out there, you got to understand that it's not going to resonate with everybody. There's three basic stories I think that work. And again, a really good guy called Kingsley Aikens back in Ireland. There's a lot of speaking on behalf of Ireland around the world for trying to get people to give to the diaspora of the Irish abroad back into Ireland. He talked about the three story types being, if you listen to a story, you want to basically say, hey, that's me. Or you want to say, hey, I could be that. Or I'd hate to be that. And they're the kind of three core stories. And when you're trying to tell a story, people want to either see it in them, see, hey, that's very like my situation, and that would appeal to me. So, that could be the story of your staff and what they do and blah, blah, blah. Or it could be aspirational. I'd love to be that one day. Or it could be just humorous. I'd hate to be that, which might be some funny story which you can play on. But if you kind of take that proposition of the stories people relate to, and there's, of course, more complex stories than that, but even as three different arcs, you can't rely on any one of those, because you don't know whether, Bill Boorman is coming along and whether he's going to be sold on the emotion of happiness or sadness or hope, but he needs to see in that story and your messaging how it works. A really big company do it well is SAP. So if you go to their About Us page, they've got kind of 4 or 5 themes, and they're all different. There's themes about saving the environment. There's themes about helping startups. There's themes about empowering women. There's different themes. And the idea is they don't ever believe any one person is going to look at all the themes and say, I like the company for all they want to do. All you got to do is find one story there that resonates with you, and then you'll go further and apply for one of their jobs. And all those stories are different, and they pull on different strings, different emotions, and also different purpose kind of statements that different types of people might have. But they're architected in a way to try to appeal to the most amount of people while still trying to stay true to what SAP stand for.
I think for me, something I'm thinking while I'm hearing people speaking, and it's a story a Washington audience will recognise. Some of them will agree, some of them will disagree because they'll have far better knowledge than me. But 2 weeks ago in Arizona, I was lucky enough to see Michelle Obama speak, who I think is probably the best speaker I've ever seen, and I've seen lots and lots of them. And there was out of all the things that were said, there were 2 things which were lasting kind of impressions which go back to this, how do you make you feel? And the 2 things that she said that really stood out for me, one was when she said, she actually said, I'm proud of my husband as a father, first and foremost. So I'm most proud of that. Out of all the things that he has accomplished and done and been the president and all the rest of it, I'm proud of the father that he is. It said the man that he is might have some faults to.
And how did that make you feel when you heard that?
As a father, I could relate to that, right? So there was a relatable point straight away. You go, right, I understand that.
Right.
I hope.
Like through all the things that he's gone through.
Yeah.
But the most important thing is something that you do.
You're right. So something we have in common,
value.
a normal thing, right? In which it's going to be delivered in different ways, but we roughly want the same things. And the other thing that she said that really resonated with me was when she was talking, not about specific politics, but was saying that actually, whenever we do anything, our actions should be governed by what's good for all the children. And she just spread one word, right? So she could have just said, we're governed by what's good for all the children, and we could have gone, yeah, okay, that's an okay statement. But to say what's good for all the children, suddenly you're going, that means everybody. That means the rich ones, the poor ones, the black ones, white ones, Chinese, Latino.
It means all of us.
It means all of us.
Children.
But all of our children. Like if we made our decisions, and she was saying whether you're in business or whatever you are, if your actions are driven by what's good for all the children, then it's going to be cool. Everything's going to be cool and fine. And that's how we should measure people and organisations. Right? So that for me, it comes back to Johnny's point, was how I felt about that you can listen to someone speak for 90 minutes, and there's many individual stories in there which were quite nice about living in the White House and all this kind of stuff. Nice stories. But it was those ones that you could relate to. So I immediately, there was 2 things. One was to say, when she was saying, above all else, I'm proud of my husband as a father. Like before president, everything else, as a dad, that's the thing I'm most proud of. And that's his number one job. he would still say that that's always been his number one job, right? So I could relate to that. So you get that feeling of this is like me, even though the circumstances and situations are world apart. There's a connection in there that says this is like me, and I feel good about that. And the other one was the point of all the children. So we were talking about completely different worlds, right? Someone who was the first lady, some would say still first lady, but who was the first lady and all that kind of stuff. Regardless of our worlds being completely different, and me running kind of a one-person, self-employed guy, globetrotting around the world working with organisations, we're worlds apart, where we kind of go, on that one thing, we're on the same line. Right. It's made me rethink a lot of the stuff that I'm talking about. I think if
she brought you in to her story.
But her story became my story. Yeah. And that's the feeling emotional thing, in that I could see myself in that story, not in the circumstance, not in the situation, but in I hear where you're coming from, and this story applies to me. This is important to me. This makes me passionate. This makes me want to do better at something. And I think when we're talking about stories,
you're sharing it.
Right. And I'm telling as many people as I can. And when and I've written about it, I did a video about it, I've done a podcast about it, and said, these two things out of everything. What does it mean in my... And it made me go away and reevaluate and actually sit down. And then I actually sat down and thought and made some notes up and stuff and said, how does what I do actually make things better for all the children?
And so how does what you do make things better for all the children?
Well, from a recruiting point of view, I've always been driven by how do we make recruiting better, right? How do we make hiring better? And there's many faults with it. And how do we make hiring better for everyone? Whether you're a recruiter or you're a candidate or you're an applicant, how do we make it better and simpler? Part of that is education. How do we go out and just teach people how to do it better? But I actually think the other really important point is when you work in hiring or talent acquisition or business in general, how do you reintroduce human thinking? Right? That at the end of this, if I've got 700 employees, right? It's very easy to me think, look at a spreadsheet and say, employees 700, but not to think these are 700 stories. These are 700 people. These are 700 people who have a unique circumstance. These are 700 people who have unique situations. These are 700 people who need to get paid to put food on the table. These are 700 people, which equals 1,500 children, which means 500 spouses. That means 400 mortgages, 300 rents. That mean all of these things, right? So for me, what it made me reconnect with, which I've had to do, is how do we put the human back in this? In that we're thinking this isn't a number. This isn't a one. This isn't a one. This isn't a 400. It's 400 people and 400 stories, right? And I think if we can get back to that and connect on that level and find out what people's stories are. So kind of when I'm interviewing, your skills and stuff I can take from a test or an assessment or your resume, we can take that as roughly a given. Tell me the story. What's your story? Tell me why you're here. And tell me why you want to be here. Now, you might only want to be here.
That's something that a lot of the folks listening who do interviewing would want to bring into the conversation, right?
But they don't really do that.
Engaging them. I'm saying,
because
they're listening to this and thinking, this is probably a great way to kind of get a better sense of who it is that I'm
generally speaking. So if I think back to the way I used to interview before we had computers and all this kind of stuff, you'd bring me your resume, and I would put it on one side and say, that's great, that's what's got you in the door. This piece of paper has got you in the door. It said you've got X, Y, Z. What I want to know now is your story. Tell me your story. Tell me what you want out of this. Before I start asking you what I want out of this, tell me what you want out of it. Tell me why you want that. And I used to have certain questions that I'd ask people, would be standard stuff like, I'd say, right, what do you want to know about this job? And if you didn't want to know anything about the job, I'd kind of go, well, you're just here for... I need to feel as an interviewer, and you need to make me feel, if you're coming for an interview, that you're here for my job, not a job. Even though the reality is you might be here for a job because you've got a mortgage to pay and you've got to get a job and you've got to work somewhere. That emotional connection bit is me feeling you giving me reasons why, you giving me a story that says, this is the reason I'm here. Now, sometimes that's saying, I've thought about what you do. Now, before we go into the interview, you probably think I'm weak in these areas. But let me tell you what I am strong in, and let me tell you how I can show you that. This is what I've done before. This is things I've learned, and I can promise you that if you give me this opportunity, I'm going to learn to do this, and that stuff I said earlier. I'm going to really. If that means I've got to take some personal time out and do that, if that means I've got to do it at weekends, you want me to go on some courses or do some open learning, open the door to me, And they're the people who I'm going to remember. Because when I'm interviewing, I'm going to remember the people who come to me with a reason why they want to be here. And they come to me feeling, you're interested in my job, not a job. Even though I understand there's a reality that you've got to work somewhere, you're interested in my job. Now, I don't expect you to be interested in that forever, but you make me feel that.
So I'm going to hold you there. So, Johnny, you wanted to...
So in the last couple of years, we've expanded our business quite a bit, and I've had to do hiring again, a lot of hiring.
Which is kind of funny. Does the cobbler's children have shoes?
Well, that's the thing. So I was like, well, okay, how am I doing it? And to take Bill's point, one of the things that I've been doing the last couple of years, a lot more of, I didn't do when I first did interviewing, was when of course, I want the person to want my job, not a job. I know I got to sell for the first 10 minutes because it's not fair in the world in demand skills. You got to put a bit of effort in. You can't just say, sorry, tell me why we're amazing and why you want to work for us. You got to go, I'll give a little, and then I want them to give a little. And it's a bit of a dance, right? But I've also come to realize that if I'm not feeling it, rather than, because I understand candidate experience can be bad, process means people don't get back to you, you don't get the feedback. I made a decision a couple of years ago that if it ain't working out in the interview, I stop it there and then and tell the candidate how I feel. This is for a whole lot of reasons, right? The basic reason is because it saves all the post follow-up and you don't have the feedback.
Agree.
But the big thing is, and this is what's really got me and surprised me, is that half the time it completely changes the dynamic, and somebody who wasn't working out well ends up being the one that you remembers, because you've done the dance, they've given you all the basic stuff, and you say, I'm going to stop you there, Lauren. It's not happening for me right now. I'm just going to be straight up with you. I do not believe you're my candidate.
Do you find that like the real conversation, that connection you make with someone, shifts the conversation to where they become more authentic?
100%.
And maybe have a better conversation.
You're saying, listen, just to be clear, this ain't going the right way. Right. And if we stop now, you ain't getting the job. We're walking away.
To just like lay it on the table.
Take all the process out to follow up.
People are afraid in this country to like tell people, hey, I'm not going to hire you based on what you're saying. So
the times when I haven't done that are the only times when I've had upset candidates post-interview and complain about the experience.
Right.
Everyone else has gone, you know what? Sometimes they go, I agree with you. I just don't think it's for me. I don't have the skill set. I could sell that again to you and try harder, but I'm not that person. Right. I go, well, I'm really glad we all discovered this. And I'll have a conversation about, hey, let's go. We've got 10 more minutes. What are you trying to do with yourself? And we have a really nice chat, and if I can help with my network, I'll help that. Other people go, okay, you've taken me up wrong. And I go, give it a second. This is an artificial situation we've created for 30 minutes. It's not necessarily you. You started off bad. If you're better than that, it's cool. Why don't we do a restart? Do you want a cup of tea? Do you want a coffee? Do you want some water? Do you want to give me some information? Do you want to take a different tack?
So what I'm hearing from both of you is that it's really important to, and both of you are hiring experts, without a doubt. You put a lot of time and a lot of energy into thinking about how it is. You're enthusiasts. How it is that we bring people into organizations, bring the right people into organizations at the right time. So when you're listening to the show today, you understand these folks have been thinking about this stuff for combined decades upon decades upon decades. To be more human is really what you're talking about, what you're both talking about. To be a human being, a person. Not some fabrication, not some construct that we think we're supposed to be like, or maybe what our interview was like when we first came to the company or whatever.
It's not a job, and they're not a candidate, and you're not just an employer.
Right.
You're people, ultimately, right? In this sense, corny. You are people who are going to be aligned for 8 to 10 hours a day with a common goal, working hard side by side, and knowing that everything you do, good or bad, is going to impact every other part of your life. Because there is no work versus life. There's life, and it has work involved in it, and it's a smaller part of life than the overall part. And to kind of go, everyone wants to be with people who they can work with, who challenge them. You could be diverse about stuff. There's a whole lot of stuff around that all working. You got to be more open-minded, open to understand your biases. So I'm not saying it's just sit there and be human and go with your gut and ignore all the advice.
But we're talking about one particular angle, right?
Yeah.
We're talking about one particular thing that gets missed in the interview.
Yes.
I mean, there's 1,000 things that go on. And I wish people were here actually in this conversation, because it's a beautiful day out, and I'm sitting across from these two, your dad, right? Yeah, these two husband, fathers who clearly care about what's going on. I mean, they don't have to be talking to you or me, and it really matters to them. So if you're listening, I think, consider this as something that could really make a difference in your life, not just in what you do at work.
It is a good theme. And we started with this idea of what is it we talked about technology, we talked about people, we talked about different processes, emotions, feeling. You're right, though. You bring it all back. To remember, it's a people business.
Right.
It's the business of human resources.
We're in the people, all of us.
Personnel. And I think we can put data and technology behind it and processes, and we can put legislation in. And most of that's really good, but it's not at the expense of the fundamental fact that it's a bunch of people working together to try and achieve something. And to achieve something, it could be, as Bill pointed out, bring a wage home to my family to do something else in my life. And that I just need to do something for 8 hours that brings enough money in. That's cool. That's a noble reason to do a job. That's okay. Are we all good people who work together still with that goal? That's no problem at all. It doesn't have to be changing the world. It doesn't have to be working for the best tech company, or you're trying to send people into space. It could be just, I'm going to serve fries 8 hours a day here because these people are good people. They're my people, and they make me happy for the 8 hours I'm here, and I make them happy. And they're going to pay me on time. Yeah.
They're going to pay me on time. They're going to treat me okay. They're not going to make me change my shifts and all this kind of thing. I remember one of the best videos I ever had from a guy, and it was in San Francisco actually, and I interviewed him and said, okay, so when we boiled it down, what do you love about your job? He said, I love my job because I put my kids to bed. Simple as that. And that was like a heart-stopping moment really for me. I'm going, wow, this is an amazing story. He said, no. And when we dug into it a bit and said, well, what do you mean? He said, well, in all the jobs I've had before, kind of if I went home at 7, that was an issue. People thought I wasn't quite, or if I didn't go to the pub afterwards with everyone, they thought I wasn't quite on team.
Right.
Or I wasn't on board, right? And we can all relate to that from lots of different environments. And he said, here, I do my job, I go home. That doesn't mean I don't care about my job, but I'm not pressured about that. There's no presentism where I have to be there. People understand that I have commitments that are my life which are more important than my day-to-day job. And I think when you get those kind of stories, that's what people connect with, right? And I think what we have to understand is showing humanity isn't a sign of weakness. Showing that, look, here's my situation, this is what's going on, this is what worked for me. Understanding that as employers, we can listen to those stories and provide an environment where that story can come true for them a little bit in terms of what we deliver. We're going to get that loyalty back tenfold. And the loyalty might not mean they stay and work for us forever, and that's cool, but it will always mean they speak well of us. And I think this retention of relationship, how do people feel? I
think the thing we're talking about is missing in the workplace in general. I mean, all these things that we've done around adding technology and changing the interview process, and employee engagement is still the same. Right? Nothing changes there.
The problem is
disengaged.
This whole employee engagement thing is we've made it a thing, and we've made it a technology. We haven't got.
Well, people are still, take that away. People still hate their jobs.
But the only people.
I mean, the same amount of people like their jobs.
Yeah.
The same amount of people hate their jobs.
Yeah, but people, when we talk about engagement, really, what's beginning to disappear from work is the opportunity for accidental engagement. So the only people who engage in the workplace are smokers. Right? They're the only people who meet at a certain time, in a certain place, from different departments, for a purpose, and have a chat. Because they're standing outside in the windy, rainy bus shelter talking, going...
Is that the same where you are?
Exactly the same.
Yeah.
So smokers talk, right? Smokers meet other smokers. The same as if they're in bars or they go out for social events. You go, who's the one who's got all the friends? It's the smoking guy, because he's been outside with these 20 new people who he doesn't know. He's talked to strangers because they've got something in common, right? So we have to create in work opportunities for accidental engagement, opportunities for people to time, because work is becoming so much more structured that if I sat on a desk facing Johnny might be the person I know least about and I talk to the least. Because once we're plugged in and doing our work, we're doing our work. We might as well be on 2 different continents as being in the same building.
So one of the things, you talk about what's wrong in the workplace and the lack of human emotion. We were sitting in one of these typical strategy meetings you do a couple of weeks ago with our team, and we were talking about trying to rewrite our values, and we'd written them a couple of years ago, and we listed them out. And we were trying to come up with a new set, and then our head of marketing said, well, we're stuck, we need to narrow it down to smaller numbers. And I was kind of trying to figure out what's important to me. And the only best analogy I could use is what's important to me in the home. So in our 3 boys, myself and my wife live by 3 things. We've never verbalized them, but these are the 3 things that matter. We tell our kids and we demonstrate to them every day they should be kind, they should tell the truth and work hard. And I offer this up as a suggestion of ways to verbalize it for the team. And they say, well, why aren't they our business values? And we got thinking about it. I was like, yeah, that actually makes a lot of sense. And we added a fourth, and we said, which was speak up. And what I like about them, the more I thought about them, is that they're active. I hate workplace values and workplace activities that are passive. People say, for example, have respect for each other. Well, you know what? That's a very passive thing, because it doesn't require you to do anything apart from sit there and do nothing. Where you say, be kind, help others, get involved, speak up, they're active. And I think there's not enough activeness in what we do. There's too much, you know what, you shouldn't do that because you get into trouble. That's not allowed. Pull back that. We can't be seen to be doing that. There's so much about what you can't do that you end up just freezing. And that's where the human part of it disappears. Whereas when you kind of push back and say, you have a responsibility. Your responsibility
That's what Bill was talking about earlier about blanding.
It is. You don't bland it out, because it's easy to do that. And again, non-active principles and rules to live by are useless, because if you can stand by and still live up to the values of that organizations, that's not good enough. You need to take an active role.
You're listening to You're Hired on 96.7 FM, Arlington, Virginia. I'm here in most beautiful sunny San Francisco overlooking Alcatraz Island with the sun beaming on us. I'm here with Bill Boorman and Johnny Campbell. We're talking about being a person, I think. I'm not even sure how I'm going to title this show.
Yeah, we're running around in circles, good circles. And I think if I could talk about a principle that I think is so important in both sides of the table in recruiting, it's take responsibility. So if you're a hiring manager, business owner, head of recruitment...
You take responsibility like that. Responsibility is a big word.
So it is.
Some people use it as a club to hit their...
So to me what it means is that if something annoys you, you're frustrated with something, the status quo isn't good enough, there's an onus on you to fix it. And I don't really care if it's not in your job spec or if somebody else has responsibility for that. You've got to try and push. We all have an obligation to push. Yes, there's a point at which you've got to stop pushing where you are and find a new place to push. Don't get me wrong, right? I'm not saying push forever against a brick wall. But if the system is broken, you think it's not fair, the company doesn't treat people well, well, you know what? You can go fix that. You need to push hard against your colleagues, your peers, the owners. And you got to balance it, because, of course, you got to kind of realize you got to earn an income, etc. But it's not good enough to say, well, I can't risk my job. I can't risk this, right? Good people who push go further, and good candidates who push. You say, I'm not happy, to Bill's example earlier on, I'm not going to sit here and be the least qualified and not get this job again. I'm going to push. I'm going to take this opportunity to tell this guy that I know I'm not the best qualified, but I'm going to be the hardest worker. I'm going to push. I'm going to take the opportunity to call the company who didn't call me for interview and hound them with charm, with persistence, and get the job so I can get in the door and push. There isn't enough pushing. There's too much compliance in the world where you sit back and go, oh, well, the process is rigged. It's against me. It's not fair. This is the way it is. There's no boys club. I can't get in here. The best people I know push. And you got to remember
to share a story real quickly. So last summer, I applied for a VP of talent acquisition role, and I didn't get it. So automatically, the email came, I didn't get it. But I found the recruiter, and I called him. And he said, well, didn't you get the email? I said, no. So we started talking, and I realized they don't want someone like me. But then for the next hour, I told him what he should do to find the person he needs. And then about 3 months ago, I saw the position was still open. I reached out to him. Hey, you're having troubles? What's going on? And I gave him another hour of consulting of what's broken in his process of hiring this person. And about a week later, I called him back. I said, hey, what about me? And he said, okay, sure. So I sent him a cover letter and a resume, and I had my interviews, and it was great, but I didn't get the job, which was super disappointing. But that, to me, felt like, at least the question was answered. It wasn't I just said I gave up because he said no. I was clear that I got as far as I could take it. And I think that's what you're talking about, right? Is take what you got as far as you can go. Don't let circumstance get in the way.
So there's things that I'm learning and thinking about from general life, whether it's politics or whatever it is, where there's a message that I heard recently, it was in my presentation today, which is people don't want to be led, they want to be mobilized.
Yeah, say something about that.
It's a really powerful thing for me. It's people want to be mobilized. They want to contribute.
Right.
Right.
Do you
They
feel
want to
like
be.
that was what happened, and I don't mean that to pick on politics,
Yeah.
but that Barack Obama, Bernie Sanders, Donald Trump, that they mobilize people versus leading
They
them?
mobilise people to be able to share their own opinions. They put a bit of backing behind it. They mobilise people to form their own communities, form their own groups in social media, whether it was Facebook groups or whatever it was. They mobilise people to connect with people who were like them, who shared their view, whether you think they're right or wrong. They mobilise people to be able to make donations, participate. What they didn't want was someone to lead them. They wanted to mobilise themselves around them. And it's been especially true massively in the UK election recently, with Jeremy Corbyn and the whole momentum thing against the government. So people want to be, and we're actually saying maybe people want to be mobilised. Maybe we don't want the old school traditional leaders who stand there and say charge.
Right, like George Washington.
Yeah, but we also understand there's going to be times when we're at war when we actually need that person to step up and say, we don't have time to be democratic about it, charge and deal with this thing. And we have enough.
But a leader should be both.
Yeah, we have enough confidence
both
to
of
face.
these components.
So it's a little bit more about mobilising, and I think it's also about really that feeling of people enabling me to be in the story. And
so we're going to be wrapping up in a second, but
and the last point I'd make on that, which I was really thinking when Johnny was speaking, is about some of the work that I've done, where I said, give people guidelines, not rules. Because if you give me a rule, my first consideration is how can I break it? And when you look at me, you can see that, right? If you say to me, this is a rule. So my wife will tell you, if she says to me, you've got to be in at 10, I'll be in at 1 minute past, right? And my mum would have told you that going back in time. If you said, here's a rule, but if you say, I'd really like us to do this thing tonight, and it starts at 10, I'll be there at 9:30. I'll figure out how to do that, right? So that's been kind of the rules to a marriage, the rules to life,
right?
As my family. And that's why I try and employ with people. I'll give you a guideline and a reason why it will be good if we could do that. But if I give you a rule, you're going to try and figure out how you can break it.
So we're going to wrap up, but what would you like people to know on how to reach out to you? Or
just come find me, Bill Boorman, 2 O's, Google me, LinkedIn, Facebook, Twitter, wherever I am. Come and connect with me and let's chat.
And tell people a little bit about what you're doing, Johnny, with Social Talent, because I think it's cool.
So,
just so you know, the Social Talent logo is like this person with like a little ninja outfit on it.
It's a person. It's Hiroto.
So that's Hiroto. Hiroto is the androgynous mascot of our organization. Basically, he's a ninja, or she's a ninja. And what we want to do is turn everyone into a ninja. No one wants to be just better or qualified or professional. You want to feel like you're a ninja at what you do, whatever that might be. And that's really what we're trying to do. We started with recruiters, turning ordinary everyday recruiters into what we call ninjas. And we've got 20,000 odd of those around the world now that have gone through our online platforms with our organizations, being inspired to be better and take responsibility for their careers and their learning and be better at what they do. We now do it in the sales world as well, trying to turn sales professionals into sales ninjas. And really want to do that with everyone. That's a kind of big, audacious goal. But if you're a worker, you have a job, we want to make you a ninja at what you do, which is about doing an awesome work for your employer, but feeling super proud about what you do by bringing you the knowledge that's already out there about how to be a better person in your job, because it inspires people to be better and be happier in this bigger thing called life.
And the website's socialtalent.com.
Website is socialtalent.com. You want to find me, you'll find me on all the usual places like LinkedIn and Twitter. You want to find me on Facebook.
So how do you spell your name?
So Johnny, Johnnny, Campbell, Campbell, like the soup in the Andy Warhol.
And you got a Twitter account?
I'm on Twitter at Johnny Campbell and also at Social Talent for the company.
Awesome. I want to thank both my guests for taking the time out of the day to talk to us about some of these really cool things. So thanks again for listening to another episode of You're Hired. I'm Lauren Epstein, and you've been listening to 96.7 FM, Arlington, Virginia. We'll see you next week.
Our pleasure, Lord.